Thank you all for coming to hear about eclipses, and thank you, David, for the introduction. David's quite a talented person. I've only been here 4 weeks, and he's already signed me up for 3 talks that I've done. I really wish we were in the rock concert business. We'd both be very rich and famous by now at the rate we're booking these. So, Adventures of an Eclipse Chaser, do's and don'ts. Actually, that's an exaggeration, do's and don'ts. I'll tell you my experiences. I've done some things right. I've done a lot of things wrong. You can judge for yourself from my mistakes and successes what you might want to do in chasing an eclipse. And indeed, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to chase an eclipse, and I'll get to that in due course.
Is that an annular or Bailey piece on that first photo?
That first photo is a total eclipse. On the top, it's sharp. And on the bottom, it's the same picture, but you can see it's been damaged by bad things happening to it. Am I coming through okay in the volume here? And I should be careful where I stand so I don't get feedback. Well, this is actually when I was born, to give you a perspective of how much time I've had to chase eclipses. And actually, I think the age that I was at when I chased various eclipses is of some relevance. And I think it's important to point out that the sun was over in Libra, even though the astrologers would say I'm a Scorpio. You, of course, all understand this. If you're going to do your astrology, you've got to use the right constellation, or it's not going to work. So, what, Linda? Oh, okay.
That was Liz.
Oh, Liz, okay. So, I knew you all wanted to know this important information about when I started this program. So there are the eclipses I have already attempted to see in black. And as you can see, I have some ambitions for future eclipses. This very clearly is going to be my last one. This one coming up in 2017 is actually going to cut across Tennessee, but I've already talked to the weatherman and it's going to be clearer in Kentucky. So I recommend you all consider, if you don't go to that eclipse, my talk today will have been a failure. And you will be graded. I will be there checking faces. And if you were not there, I'm going to report your names back to David. So let's actually go through these. There are 7 attempts to watch eclipses. And let me tell you what went right and what went wrong, and give you some sense about what you might do if you chase some of these future eclipses, which and I've picked out 2 eclipses since I'm getting to be an old man now. I don't want to drive or fly too far, and so I've picked out some eclipses that are nearby.
Didn't we have one in 83?
Oh, these are the ones I attempted to chase, not all the eclipses which exist, only just the ones which I have made an attempt at. Yeah, these are the Kleinhans eclipses.
So you didn't come and visit us in 83?
No.
Shame.
So my first eclipse was an attempt in 1959 when I was only 15. It was the first time I flew in an airplane. I think I was only in the 11th grade. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the visibility of eclipses, but this little path here, and am I standing in front of anybody, or are you all seeing past me okay? This seems to be a good place to stand here because I don't hear any feedback. Is my sound okay down here?
Sounds good.
Okay. The eclipse is only visible with inside this band here, which you can see is a pretty narrow band. So, and here's New England. This, if you can't see, there's New York, and here's Boston up here, Massachusetts. So in terms of where a 15-year-old might go to see this eclipse, there's only one choice. I'm going to go to the eastern United States where the eclipse just touches the United States. That eclipse was quite spectacular. As it was a sunrise eclipse, it started to get light as the sun came up, and then it stopped getting light for a while, and then it started to get light again. And that was my first eclipse. Some beautiful clouds. So I have some rules for you all. The first rule is don't get discouraged. But that was easy for me. I was only 15, so what the heck. The second rule, which you'll see the relevance of, is, you know, if you don't go to an eclipse, you're guaranteed not to see it. And I'll show you some cases where that rule applied. But what's the big deal? And how many of you have seen a total, not a partial or an annular, but how many of you have seen a total eclipse? Okay, so most of you really know what I'm talking about and where I'm going here. The way I look at eclipses is the following. And I use an analogy with sex. Somebody could tell you about sex, or you could experience it. There's just no comparison between the two. I hope you all know that. Having it described to you just is not the same as being there and doing it. And it's exactly the same with an eclipse. Looking at an eclipse on TV, looking at an eclipse in a movie or a video clip or whatever, it just is not the same as experiencing it. You've got to experience it to understand what it's all about. I remind you that you don't have to be particularly knowledgeable about astronomy. Ancient people were terrified of eclipses. They didn't have an almanac that said you better go out and look at this little tiny phenomena that's going to happen in the sky next Thursday. They knew it was happening just because it overwhelmed them, and it was an inspiring, scary thing for them. That tells us something about the psychological impact of an eclipse. You don't really need an astrophysics degree to appreciate it. In fact, the astrophysicist who goes to eclipse is all busy with his equipment and probably doesn't see the eclipse and doesn't appreciate it. There are a huge number of things to look at in an eclipse, and I won't even try to read down that list. In fact, the piece of paper you have, one side of it has a very nice description of an eclipse. It's the best description I've had. You can't read it right now in the dark probably, but when you get home, look at it over. There's a tremendous number of phenomena that occur during a fairly short period of time. And you really need to mentally prepare yourself to be looking for all those phenomena if you want to get the most out of an eclipse that's possible. You know, everybody knows that during a totality it gets dark and you can see the corona and maybe some red prominences, but there's a whole lot of other details. The Bailey's beads, the diamond ring, the way the shadow comes in. One thing that is sort of a surprise to me that you maybe haven't seen other people mention, the crowd ambiance. I find it better to watch eclipses with other people around me than in a remote location by myself. When the eclipse starts, there's always a huge cheer, you know, and then it gets quiet, you know, and everybody's busy watching. And when the eclipse is over, there's another huge cheer. It's just really a neat group phenomena, which is always, I've always enjoyed. Well, you've all indicated you understand about a total eclipse when the moon totally covers the photosphere and we can see these faint atmospheric features of the sun as opposed to an annular or a partial eclipse. So I'm just talking about the total eclipses here this evening. And by the way, actually, I've seen one annular eclipse and it was more impressive than I thought it would be. If an eclipse on a scale of 1 to 10, if a totality is a 10, I would call an annular eclipse a 4. An annular eclipse is worth going a few miles for. It's worth getting in your car and driving. And of course, we have an annular eclipse coming up this spring on May 20th. If you have any excuse to be out west, plan your trip to overlap May 20th. You generally have to travel to find an eclipse. And I'll just show you, these are all the eclipses that are going to happen over a 50-year period in the United States. And I see that that's very hard to read. In fact, I can't even read it myself. Here's 2017, which you can see is going to come right down through Tennessee. Here is 2024. And here is 2045. That's the one I'm going to see when I'm 101. And here is whenever. I don't remember when that one was. So, and of course you have to be underneath that blue band to see the eclipse. So it doesn't come to you, you typically have to go to it. Even if we look at a map of the whole world, and I think many of you have seen these maps, the Only the blue lines represent totality. You have to be standing underneath that blue to see these total eclipses. And actually, I think I might spend a minute or two talking about how these maps can be interpreted, because if you start looking up an eclipse you might want to go to, you need to be able to read these maps. If you go to the NASA website, there's a guy by the name of Fred Espenak, I'm not sure that's the correct pronunciation, who is kind of Mr. Eclipse and does lots of calculations and has got everything calculated for the past and the future as long as any of us are going to live. And you inevitably come to one of these charts he's got, which has a huge amount of data on it, which is a little bit overwhelming. And so I'm going to tell you to forget 90% of it. When you see one of these charts on the NASA website, when the eclipse is important. So there's going to be a total eclipse, and this is the one August 21st, 2017. It's going to come to you people, so you don't even have to go chase it. It's going to come to you. Where is it? Well, there's a map of the world, and I'm going to show a bigger picture of it in a minute, but you've all got it on the piece of paper in front of you on that back, so you can follow along in a minute if you can't see. And there's two other important pieces of detail on the NASA website. How long is the eclipse going to last? And this eclipse looks like it's going to last. Again, man, I can't. I think it says 3 minutes, and who's got? Is there a spare copy of that somewhere that I can?
Mine didn't get one.
Okay, thank you. I thought I had enough for somebody back there is hiding them.
Mine's all white.
So 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And the other thing that is perhaps worth looking at is how wide the path is. And in this case, the path is 114 kilometers wide. So as the eclipse shoots across the land, it's only a 114 kilometer wide path where you can actually see it. This is the close-up map you got, and I think it's, how many can read this map and have, totally familiar with it? A couple of you. Let me just show you a few details about eclipses that when you start looking at maps and thinking about doing your own planning. And I'm not sure about the next comment. I think eclipses always start at sunrise and always end at sunset. And so the eclipse always starts on the west end of this line. So over here, this eclipse in August 21st, 2017 is going to start out in the Pacific Ocean right here at sunrise. And then the totality is going to just be a little circular shadow that's only on the Earth at one point at one time. And based on this piece of paper here, that circular shadow is never going to be more than 114 kilometers in diameter. And that shadow is going to start racing across the surface of the Earth at over 1,000 miles an hour. And it's only going to be total underneath this little band right here. But of course, people outside of totality are going to see a partial eclipse. And you can actually see there's partial eclipse be visible all the way down to here. If you're on this line, just a tiny nibble will be taken out of the sun. If you're on this line, this is probably the 80% line, 80, 60, 40, 20, 0. So there, 80% of the sun's going to be covered up. Same way over here, 80%, 60%, 40%, 20% covered up. So that shadow is racing across, and here's the universal time. It's 17 hours universal time. You all know that's just the time in Greenwich, England. So for Tennessee, that's when we're on standard time in the wintertime, it's a 5-hour difference. It's 5 hours earlier here, 5 hours later there in England. So 1,700 hours universal time is subtract 5 hours, that's 12 o'clock universal time. That'd be noon time. That would be noon time in terms of Eastern Standard Time. But of course, if you were at this point, it wouldn't be Eastern Standard Time there. So this eclipse shadow moves along at thousands of miles an hour. There's only a little circle that's of people that's experiencing the eclipse. And it's going to get down here to, that little star indicates where the eclipse is going to be longest. And so that tells us that, in fact, in Tennessee, we're going to be pretty close to the point where it's going to have the maximum duration. And then the eclipse is going to continue on out into the Atlantic, and the eclipse will end there at sunset. You can go to that same eclipse on the NASA website and link to a Google map. And so here we are in, there's Knoxville. So here's the path through Tennessee. And by the way, the red line is the center line. If you want to see the maximum duration, you'd be on that line. If you get over here on the edge, the eclipse lasts 1 second. Bad. Yes, it goes, you know, right here I think is, somewhere here is Harriman. I can't remember. Yeah. So, and then with Google Maps, you can click on your location. And so here I've clicked on Harriman right here, and it tells you exactly the details of the eclipse. It's going to, the maximum eclipse is going to occur at 18 hours and 33 minutes. I don't know if it tells the time here. But in any case, it's really neat. So you can do your own research and find out exactly when that eclipse is going to occur. It's beautifully set up on NASA's website.
Right over the observatory. Who in this organization? Somebody has a lot of polls.
Right, yes, well. and of course, in addition to all these predictions about when the eclipse is going to occur, you can also get a weather prediction ahead of time too. But when you do look at a weather prediction, they do them for all eclipses. It's based on past history, and it's like the stock market. Past history is no guarantee of future performance, but it's better than nothing. So, not my wisdom, but my experiences. Eclipse number 2. I'm in school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we drive all the way to Trois Rivières, and here's the eclipse path, this little narrow path here. This eclipse is only 57 seconds long. That is scarily short. You should try to do nothing but observe an eclipse that's that short. But I was very ambitious, 57-second eclipse. At that time, I had a 2.4-inch refractor. A friend had a camera, and we had all these ambitious plans. He was going to photograph the eclipse for 29 seconds, and I was going to photograph the eclipse for 29 seconds. We had it all written down on paper. We never practiced it. What a bunch of nonsense. You know, we got a little bit late to the site. We were hurried in setup. As the light level goes down, I became a primitive native man who started to panic and run, you know, just, we're running out of time. And then I spent the first 29 seconds looking at my watch, and the second 29 seconds telling Hugh, you're up, Hugh, your time's up, let me have the camera, let me have the camera. Then the eclipse is over. I have almost no memories of that eclipse except looking at my watch and yelling at Hugh to give me the camera. So, you know, it's way too ambitious a program. This was 1963 through Maine and through Quebec. So, eclipse number 3. And now remember my rule, if you don't go, you won't see it. So this is February 26, 1979. I live in Indianapolis, and I'm telling my friends I'm going to drive all the way up to Winnipeg, Canada to spend the night. You know, this is February. There's snow on the ground. There's a lot of snow on the ground. And my sane friend said, you know, you're an idiot. You're insane. And I said, well, you know, if you don't go, you won't see it. So
we went from UT and went up there, stayed overnight in Minnesota, and went on up into Canada. And we might have to come back down to Montana, listening to weather reports and stuff. And finally, you know, we're facing a hole in the clouds. Oh, half an hour to go, we got to set up the stuff. And luckily, the hole drifted over where we could see.
it was indeed a good eclipse. We observed it, my group observed it from here. Again, totality is only in this little narrow band, and if you get on the edge of the band, the eclipse duration drops to 0 seconds. So you want to be in the middle, maybe half. So now I've got 2 minutes and 57 seconds, and I've got a really ambitious program. Boy, oh boy. I've got a 5-inch Celestron, a friend's got a SLR, and we tested this all out beforehand. You know, you test it out like on the sun with a solar filter on it to make sure you can focus and everything operates. So I get 1 minute and 28 seconds to photograph. My friend gets 1 minute and 28 seconds. I also set up a 400 millimeter telephoto. I put taped instructions on a tape recorder, gave it to my buddy and said, just follow the instructions on the tape recorder and shoot the pictures that you're instructed to on the tape. And I had a Super 8 film camera pointed back toward the crowd to get a picture of everything that was happening. So man, I was really set for this eclipse. So we got there early, and again, I had time to enjoy the light. The light is really interesting. It takes on kind of a gray appearance. It's very unusual. What do you mean, when do you start? You start when the eclipse starts. So I had to run over and give him some help. And then I shot too much of my share of the film, and we ran out early on the telescope, pissing my buddy off. And then, time just flies. 2 minutes and 57 seconds felt like 30 seconds. The eclipse ended. And one of my friends came over with a tape recorder, getting everybody's impressions. And right on that tape, I wish I could bring it, but I didn't have time to transfer it. On the tape, I'm heard saying, "Wait, stop, I didn't get to see anything." That's what I said after 3 minutes of an eclipse. It's like, I just won't learn. We did get some good pictures. First of all, that we had a weatherman who took us to a clear point where we got to see the sky well. If you don't recognize that person, that's me talking to the sky gods the night before. I had more hair back then and it was darker than it is now. We did have snow, but we actually, the local people plowed their parking lots, and we had a beautiful place to set up, and it was really, really wonderful. There's my Super 8 camera shooting back. I need to digitize that. It gave a great video of everything that was happening. My buddy and I did get some nice pictures of the eclipse. One thing to remember, which is illustrated by these pictures, these were the 5-inch celestron. Remember that, you say, well, gee, totality occurs, there's a corona, and there's prominences. It's more complicated than that. The prominences, let me think. In this picture, what we see is the moon is moving from, it's always going to be the case. It's always going to be the case that the moon is going to move from left to right. The moon always moves in from the west and goes off to the east. So the moon is moving in from the left. You can see more of this corona and the prominences are visible here, and things are covered up over here. Just 5 or 10 seconds later, you can see now that this prominence is getting covered up here, and some other prominences are being uncovered. So you can see these prominences are much more visible here than they are here, just 10 or 20 or 30 seconds later. So there's a constant changing appearance of what you can see as the moon goes across, covering the left edge of the sun and uncovering the right edge of the sun. So it's a constantly changing phenomena. And of course, the camera, it's useful whenever you look at a picture of the sun to realize that the camera does not have the same dynamic range as your eye. The exposure here was designed to capture just the innermost part of the corona and the prominences. You cannot see the outer corona here. Your eye can see it all at once, and that's a key thing to remember. If I take a longer exposure with the camera, then I pick up the outer corona. There was a coronal loop visible here. I do not have much recollection of streamers, coronal streamers being visible for this eclipse, and that might in part have been due to the fact there were high cirrus clouds. And also it depends where you are in the sunspot cycle. So certainly my experience is the corona can look very different from one eclipse to the next, depending on where you are in the sunspot cycle and how clear your sky is. By gosh, the best sky I ever had was the one where it was raining just hours before the eclipse. It completely cleared the sky out, and then there was absolutely fabulous view of the corona, better than I've ever seen before. Okay, so I don't do anything for a while. In July 11, 1991, now I'm up to age 47. And all these eclipses up to now I've arranged myself, taking I actually took about 30 students and their some family members to that previous eclipse, but I made all the arrangements myself. This eclipse in 1991, if I had gone to Baja in Mexico, the eclipse would have been 7 minutes long. If I go to Hawaii, it's only 4 minutes long. Because I was arranging this myself, I decided I could do a better job of arranging logistics for myself here than here. I was afraid that flying into Baja, the weather's going to be cloudy here. The weatherman said it's going to be cloudy there. Weatherman said it's going to be clear here. But I looked at the flights and I said, it's going to be too hard to get in there and out. And things go wrong. I'll be standing in an airport somewhere and there'll be an eclipse somewhere else. So I made a choice to go to Hawaii because we all know it's always sunny in Hawaii. So that was my choice, even though I got a shorter eclipse. The eclipse crossed the Big Island. There's the center line. It's just perfect. If you know the Big Island, this is the Gold Coast to the Big Island. It's always sunny here. 90% chance of sunshine on any given day. There happens to be Waikoloa Village there. On the other hand, up here in Waimea, it always rains. It's always cloudy. It always rains when you're in Waimea. Here, it's pretty good, but not as good as there. So I set myself up right there with a few friends. And there's the marvelous eclipse that we captured on that day. 4 minutes of clouds in a place where it's always clear. Meanwhile, my friends who went to Baja got 7 minutes of spectacular totality right overhead. And you're going to lose some. You're going to lose some. And of course, it turned out in Waimea, right during totality, the clouds parted, the rain stopped, and what really pisses me off is these people who didn't even get out of their rainy village to go to where it was going to be clear in Hawaii, the people who didn't even leave their own rainy village, just stepped out their door during the mid-eclipse and looked up and saw totality. And I had flown 5,000 miles to go to the place where it was guaranteed to be sunny, and I saw clouds. I had some friends who were driving up the road to join me, and as they drove up the road, they said, crap, it's getting cloudier and cloudier. Why are we driving into the clouds? They stopped right there, and they saw the eclipse. There's only a difference of, 10 miles here and another 10 miles there. If you're in the wrong place, you're screwed. And mobility, then, is a key thing.
You've just lost your invitation to Tao for the next eclipse. Be somewhere else.
But, I'm 5 for 7. Can that's pretty good odds. Pretty good odds. I've got pretty good luck. Back then in 1991, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the means to communicate. If this eclipse were going to reoccur, I'd be talking to my friends on the cell phone, and they'd say, hey, we're down here and it's clear. And I'd have been getting down there.
You work in astronomy and you don't have a ham license?
Well, that is correct. I don't have a ham license, and there was a ham.
That's why God's punishing.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. But this punishment is an important thing. We need to address that. Stay mobile if you can. But Pele, the volcano goddess, expects a sacrifice if you want to be rewarded in some other way. And so it turns out that the Hawaiian volcano Kilauea was active in 1991, as it is much of the time. This is not my picture, but it shows basically what we saw. I missed the eclipse, but I got to see molten lava flowing into the Pacific Ocean and steam pouring out, and I could hear the lava gurgling down the lava tubes, and it was just incredible. And since I'd seen eclipses before, but I'd never seen, sorry, John, but since I'd never seen a volcano before, I consider that a fair trade, a sacrifice to the volcano goddess. And so that would be my rule number 3, if I've got it here. And that is have a plan B. When you go somewhere, make sure if you get clouded out, you do something else that makes your trip worthwhile. Because that, I have a good memory of that eclipse because I got to see the volcano erupting in the ocean. Now we shoot up to February 26, 1998. Again, a 3-minute, 21-second eclipse. This one's cutting across the top of South America through the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, and then on up through the Lesser Antilles. I decided to go to Curacao. I can't remember why, probably because the weatherman said it was going to be clear there, and the logistics looked better. And for that eclipse, I had a fairly simple plan. I was going to observe it. I was going to videotape it with a Canon Hi8 camera, and I had that thoroughly tested. Testing means, getting like a Mylar filter and shooting the sun. There are issues you've got to worry about when you're doing this. You've got to take a photograph through a filter, and then as totality approaches, you've got to get that filter off. So right when exciting stuff is happening on the sun, you want to make sure you're not jacking around with a filter. The good news is the CCD chips are pretty tolerant of a lot of light. So in fact, it worked out pretty well. We had perfect skies because the rain cleared them. I had a good feeling it was raining, and I just felt lucky this day. So you need me a towel. The rain didn't bother me. I just felt lucky, and I knew it was going to be fine. The camera only took some of my time.
That morning, if you feel good, you come.
Okay, if I don't feel good, stay away. Fair enough. But I think I'm going to go to Kentucky for that eclipse because I've already read the weather report. It's going to be clearer in Kentucky than it's going to be in Tennessee. For this eclipse, for the first time, I really saw spectacular coronal streamers. We saw shadow bands afterward. And, you know, I was on a beach with a lot of other people, and just the ambiance of the crowd was just, that eclipse put a big smile on my face. I did get a good video. Again, if I was a good person, it'd be in my PowerPoint presentation, but it's not. That's a picture that I did not take, but it shows some of the incredible streamer pattern. But it doesn't begin to capture because there was even like 10 times more detail, just a huge amount of detail in the streamers in this eclipse, which I attribute in large measure to the very, very transparent sky and the sun being pretty high overhead. Okay, so now I'm ramping up. I saw an eclipse in 1998, and here I am again just 3 years later. This eclipse is going to cross Africa. It was not, now we finally make the choice. I'm not confident to arrange my own trip in Africa. So I finally go with a tour group. But it's worth keeping in mind, I went to a tour group that already did tours in this region every year. And they just stuck the eclipse onto their tour. And I said, well, you know, they do this every year. They don't have an astronomer in their group. I wrote to them and I said, you need me. I'm a world famous astronomer. I'll help you arrange this tour to chase this eclipse. They gave me a small discount. Who cares? But I helped to make decisions about where we would be when for the eclipse, and actually made it better for everyone. Where to go? You don't want to go to Angola. There's a civil war. You don't want to go to Mozambique because there are clouds there all the time. So we watched the eclipse from Zambia. 3 minutes, a nice long eclipse. Good food. I did a professional tour. My plan, again, was to try to observe the eclipse, record my observations on a digital recorder, just take some shots with a point-and-shoot camera. And I really wanted to mentally prepare myself for all the phenomena I was going to see. Oh, and David wanted a picture of me in eclipse. You know, I'm just about strangled here because I wear glasses. There are my glasses. There's my digital recorder hanging on a shoelace. There, you know, if I only had $1 left to spend, it'd be on a pair of Canon image-stabilized binoculars. Those are the best things since sliced bread. That would be my choice for watching any eclipse. But a small telescope to watch the partial phases was also neat. I also looked at some of totality with that, but really the binoculars were all I needed.
Is that homemade telescope?
No, that's just a cheap Maksutov, you know, $300 or something. I didn't want to take anything too expensive to Africa because
We had a guy here that's taken the optics out of copy machines and making some really nice telescopes.
yeah. Well,
I just thought that was
yeah.
one of them.
no, it's a panoptic from probably Adorama camera or someplace like that. And notice I'm smiling. This is before the eclipse probably, but actually that eclipse went pretty well. I wanted to actually have an hour to prepare mentally ahead of time for all the phenomena I was going to watch, and because of the way things turned out, I only had 20 minutes. I actually needed that full hour to get the full list in my head. I cannot emphasize that too much. Mentally think about all the things you're going to do. What planets are you going to look for? What stars you're going to look for? You're going to look at the light off in the distance around the horizon where the shadow isn't covering. You're going to watch the shadow coming in. You're going to look for shadow bands. I've only seen shadow bands once. Shadow bands were seen at this eclipse by other people in my group, but again, I just didn't have it all together yet. You really have to be prepared to take advantage of all the phenomena. But it was a neat eclipse, so, I guess I only gave myself half a smile there because I didn't have as much time to prep as I want. Can't emphasize that too much. Mentally get it all together of all the stuff you want to see. And every eclipse has unexpected surprises. We were on a farm which had a lot of farm workers. And they were actually quite knowledgeable about the eclipse. They were not afraid of it at all. and they were very excited to watch it. They looked through our telescopes. They were very respectful. The bonus, the Large Magellanic Cloud I'd never seen before, and even with a pair of binoculars, I can't remember now, there were like 10 or 12 objects I could pick up with binoculars in the Large Magellanic Cloud. So if you have a chance to see an eclipse in the southern hemisphere, there's just, it's an incredible opportunity, because guess what? Eclipses occur during what phase of the moon? Everybody at once. What phase of the moon for a total solar eclipse? New moon. So how do the stars look during a new moon?
Right.
Really great, because there's no moon screwing up the sky. So we had incredible skies in Zambia and Botswana, and so that was a bonus. And also the other thing probably that was my favorite was Victoria Falls, which was part of the trip. So now, I'm getting to be decrepit now. We're up to July 11, 2010, and this eclipse is going to go across Easter Island, Tahiti, and the Cook Islands, I think. The weatherman said it was going to be cloudy in Easter Island. The weatherman said it was going to be a 60% chance of being clear in Tahiti. So I voted for Tahiti. Again, that's too difficult to arrange myself. I figured even if I booked a room, somebody would take it away from me. So it's part of a tour group. And eclipse travel is a really huge business now. I had a choice of perhaps 8 different tour companies for this eclipse. So you can choose whether you want the deluxe chrome-plated tour with a whole lot of extra stuff thrown in and a lot of extra expense, or a bare bones tour. You really can find whatever you want to suit your own particular desires. The eclipse path is hard to see on this picture, but man, that must be the center line. The key thing is the main island at Tahiti, which is in fact called Tahiti, is outside the path of totality. And so we had to go to one of the out islands, and I was amazed. We had air flights at like 2 in the morning, and our group was too big to all go to one place. Half our group went to this atoll here, which was going to experience like almost 4 minutes of totality, and half our group went to this atoll here, which was going to experience 3.5 minutes of totality. It turned out that I figured, what happens if the plane has a flat tire? You know how planes are. Something goes wrong, and then you're sitting there on the ground. Our contract with Air Tahiti actually included them having to have a backup plane for us in case the primary plane went down. So that's something to ask if you sign up for a tour. What's their backup plan? So we got up at 2 in the morning, and I flew out to Hao Atoll. I planned to mostly concentrate on observing, but I still made a mistake. I said I'm going to observe with very big binoculars, and I'll show you why that was a mistake in a minute. I also decided to shoot some shots with a DSLR. Modern digital cameras can be highly automated. I had an automatic sequencer, and it was still too much trouble. Again, I had my digital recorder, prepare for all the phenomena. There I am smiling before the eclipse with my 30 by 77 power binoculars. The problem with these is, think about it, when you put your eye up to those eyepieces, all you're seeing is an image of the sun. I could just as easily sit in front of a TV in Indianapolis and watch this eclipse. It's the total ambiance of the whole thing. It's everything that's happening around you that makes the eclipse. And if you just sit there with your eyes glued to the binoculars, you miss 90% of it. I didn't, again, something else I learned the hard way. I would not do that again. I have a pair of 15 power binoculars, which are handheld, image stabilized. That would be my binoculars of choice for an eclipse. Enough power to really get a good view. But with binoculars, you're going to be taking them down and putting them up, and you're going to be tracking all the phenomena around you all the time. There I am set up at the eclipse site. This was kind of an adventure. We were allowed only 25 pounds. And when I say only 25 pounds, I mean we were all individually weighed to see how much our gear weighed. And we were told that if the plane was over limit, they would just start throwing equipment off the plane until they got under their limit. And so, They put the fear of God in us. But you know, all this equipment, my table, my 2 tripods, my binoculars, that was the camera I shot with to give you an idea of when you see the picture in a minute. And my suitcase and another pair of binoculars and my water bottle, all under 25 pounds. There's my point and shoot shot. It was really, in some ways, it captured the overall scene, but again, the picture's not the same as being there. There's one of the pictures I got with just my little telephoto lenses, a 250 millimeter lens on an APS-C chip, so it's equal to about 380. This fellow had a 400 millimeter telephoto, I think, with a 2-time doubler on it. He had a more expensive camera with fancier hardware. He got some awesome shots, but he devoted all his time to taking those pictures and very little to actually looking at the eclipse. So even with just telephoto equipment as opposed to a telescope, which becomes much more unwieldy, I don't recommend, you know, a telescope for an eclipse, particularly unless it's a really lightweight one on a simple tripod. He got some great shots, but he wanted to concentrate on photography. I'm not sure that's the right thing for me to do. We were observing from here. Look at the scale. That's like, I don't know, how many miles is that? You know, it doesn't look any I think that says 5 miles there. This is maybe 10 miles long. It was clear here. It was cloudy over here. Just a few miles made a difference. Those people who signed up for this trip first, who went to the closer atoll, who had 4 minutes of totality, they had 4 minutes of clouds. We second-rate people who got the further away atoll with the shorter eclipse got 3.5 minutes of eclipse. It's just the luck of the sky gods and whether you're a ham radio operator and whatever. So that was a good eclipse, but again, I didn't follow all the phenomena as well as I would have liked. I spent too much time looking through my big binoculars. So those are sort of my recommendations for how I think you should prepare for an eclipse. But of course, if you get to go to a couple of eclipses, I think it makes sense to take pictures at one eclipse, get some good pictures, put them in your file, and then forget about taking pictures after that. Just observe. It really, remember, I really think the native peoples, if they had a digital camera and a video camera and a whole lot of crap, and you told them they had to take pictures of the eclipse or their heads would be chopped off, they wouldn't have been scared by the eclipse because they'd been so busy operating their equipment, they wouldn't have seen the actual phenomena that was spectacular. I really think that's the case. So just expose yourself to what's happening out there. And of course, my plan B for Tahiti was to be in a nice place. But I can tell you that Tahiti is no different than Hawaii or the Caribbean, so there's no need to go that far away for a beach. Unless, of course, you stay in the big bucks hotels out here that are $700 a night and there's only 3 people per square mile, but that's too rich for my blood. So anyway, that's my story, and I thank you for your attention.